Good day, everyone. I'm Todd Stankiewicz with Psychon Capital. In today's episode of Life Unlocked, we explore the profound intersection between financial well-being and living your best life. In each episode, we delve into the insights of thought leaders who understand that true wealth is not just about the numbers in your bank account, but about the quality of life those numbers enable. Today, we have the privilege of being joined by Professor Statman, Professor of Finance at Santa Clara University. He's renowned for his groundbreaking work in behavioral finance. Professor Statman has just released his latest book, A Wealth of Wellbeing, a holistic approach to behavioral finance. In A Wealth of Wellbeing, Professor Statman explores how financial well-being intertwines with life well-being, presenting the third generation of behavioral finance. This book combines scientific findings from various fields with practical stories highlighting that true wealth goes beyond financial metrics and extends to family, health, work, and social relationships. Professor Statman, thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of Life Unlocked.
I'm delighted to be with you, Todd.
The pleasure is really mine. I've been really excited about doing this since you agreed to do it with me. It's been one of my favorite books that I've read, probably in the past couple of years, and really has provided a lot of perspective on things. And there's so much we could talk about. How did you first become interested in behavioral finance? How did you first get into that field?
I was a student at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in the late 60s, and I studied economics and statistics, and I hoped that at least in economics we are going to learn some more about actual human behavior, but it was not the case. It was standard finance is about rational people who are interested only in maximizing their wealth. And the odd thing, is that at that time, the building that housed the economics department was right next to the building that housed the psychology department. And from time to time, I would step into the psychology group to participate in experiments just for pocket money and fun. Well, at that time, Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman were doing their work in that building, and I had no idea who they were. Nobody mentioned their names. And so it is odd how I learned about their work just a long time after that, at the very beginning of the 1980s. Those experiments, as it turns out, when I spoke with them, were not theirs, but it kind of gives you the idea of how distant that standard finance is from what we know as behavioral finance, even in its first generation, because they talked about cognitive and emotional shortcuts and how they turn into errors and so on, that we are by now all familiar with.
I think behavioral finance, it wasn't even a thing back then when they were doing their work. I think people only talked about it a little bit, but they put a lot of it on the map with prospect theory. So I think that was really an important piece of research, but that wasn't talked about for many years later.
Well, yes, and I don't think that they thought about finance when they did their work. And before prospect theory, there was the work about those cognitive errors, whether it is availability or confirmation bias and so on. And they did not necessarily see the connection to finance. That came later. In fact, when Hirsch Sheffrin, my colleague, and I published a paper on dividends, why it is that people like dividends and make a distinction between dividends and capital, and why it is that if they don't get a dividend, why don't they just sell a few shares and get whatever cash they had? So we use prospect theory, and we use notions of regret and mental accounting and so on. I remember at that time, Amos Tversky was at Stanford, and Stanford is not very far from us at Santa Clara, and we invited him for lunch. And he said, I just got an honorary doctorate at the university in Sweden, and they mentioned this article, and they said, here it is. And so you're right. At that time, at the very beginning of the 1980s, there was no such thing as behavioral finance. We didn't really think of it as behavioral finance. We just thought of it, I thought of it as, here is something that is kind of funny, that is, standard finance says that people should not care about dividends, that it is not rational. Well, people do care about dividends. So what do you do? Now, one possibility is to say that's crazy and that's outside of the field of finance, and we'll leave it to psychiatrists. Well, that's nonsense. That is what you're trying to do in finance, is make sense of the world of finance and help people do better in their lives with finance. And so you cannot really separate them. And fortunately now, they are no longer separate. It was kind of a struggle at the beginning, but now it is really quite easy. You see behavioral finance everywhere.
I think that's really the premise of your book, right? A Wealth of Well-Being talks a lot about integrating financial health with overall life happiness, right? And and in my side of the field, I've paid a lot of attention to this. I've built my career on this foundation. But when you try to get this message across to advisors, how can they actually use this idea to help clients live a better life? Like, what do you see in practice that can be done?
So I speak a lot with financial advisors, and when I speak to financial advisors, I often say, the biggest risks in life are not in the stock market. I say, if you want real risk, get married, and if you want more risk, have children, because the point is obvious. And yet that point is kind of surprising. And it's surprising because advisors, when they think about their work, they think about it in the context of finance. How can we help people design their spending and saving such that they build portfolios and have a secure retirement and so on? Well, that is all true, but there's more to it. That is, you need finances for all aspects of life. But I think about life as a portfolio. And of course, money is a big part of it. But then there is family, and there is friends, and there is education, and there is work, and there is religion, and there is more than that. And the point I'm making really is that in everyone's portfolio of securities, some securities end up being stinking, really losing, and some are going to have fabulous returns. Well, what you do as a financial advisor, you say, here's why I advise you to diversify your portfolio, because there will always be losers and there will always be winners, except that we don't know which is going to be in the next period. The same applies to issues of life. In every family, in every person, there are points of pain. There are some domains that have injuries to them. For me, for our family, it is an older daughter who lives with bipolar illness, a mental illness. And when we encountered that years ago, it felt like our world is coming apart. That is, I let that loss really seep into everything, into my marriage, into my work, and so on. But I've learned to kind of separate them and say, we are not unique in that. That is, many families, perhaps all families, have those points of pain. And what is necessary is for advisors to inquire about these, to make themselves open to listen to these, and then treat the client as a good physician treats a client or a patient. That is, we expect good physicians to know all about medicine, as we expect financial advisors to know about finance, but we expect also more than bedside manner. We expect physicians to be able to elicit what really is painful. And some of the things are very embarrassing, you know, and so I think about financial advisors as financial physicians, combining that touch where people really feel comfortable discussing their pain. And all of those points of pain, these are not just kind of idle curiosity. That is, if you have a disabled child, you have financial instruments, you have financial arrangements that are required. One financial advisor told me about a couple that came to him, and they said, before you start planning for us, you should know that we have a disabled son, and we want to arrange a trust for him such that he is taken care of long after we are gone. So here is a case where a client is forthcoming and tells you, but in many cases they don't. In many cases they think of, you know, this is private pain. But it is something that if you disclose it, in all likelihood, the advisor will share some similar stories in his or her own life, and you're going to change the relationship from one of advisor and client to one of really two friends, speaking about things that really matter in life. So for example, I had years ago, there was an advisor I know, and his son, who was at that time, I think, college student, had a psychotic break. And he and his wife were as bewildered as we were decades before. We invited them over to our home. We shared what we know, and now that advisor, in fact, many of his clients are people who either live with mental illness or someone in their family lives with mental illness. And so you can see how those things are really linked together. Mental illness is common, unfortunately. Physical illness is common. Divorces are common. All kinds of things are there. And if you are able to create a relationship with clients that kind of crosses from finance to life, then you're going to have a client for life. That really is what is important. And if you speak with them about their life, you will see how it brings you together. So, for example, I say, you know, this book of mine, one of the things that I think advisors can do, self-serving as it is to share it with their clients and then have conversations with them, because this kind of facilitates that crossing from finance to life. For example, I talk early on about the notion of giving with a warm hand rather than a cold one. And I say that what in my view, in the culture that I come from, Israeli by origin, parents give money to kids when they are in their 20s to have a down payment for a house. Not everyone agrees that that is a good idea, but at least it opens a conversation where you can see that. And you can see how by doing that, you also involve one way or another children. And so you're talking about rather elderly parents and adult children. And many advisors lose those children when their parents are gone, because the children say, I don't know this advisor and I don't think that he cares much about me. But if they know, for example, that you spoke with their parents about perhaps sharing their wealth before they are gone rather than when they are gone, you know, you might have some better chance of those clients sticking around with you. And so it is really, sometimes you just need some tool to get into conversations. You don't really have this thing where you meet somebody and you say, "Hi, my name is Meir, and I have a daughter who lives with mental illness." For that you need kind of that beginning of a friendship, of a relationship. And I think that the stories that I tell, real stories in my book, would enable advisors to initiate or continue those conversations.
I agree with you, right? I think it's really important. We implement actually something with our clients called our best life and values survey or profile, and it allows us to start to get to know clients at a really deep level. But what I find so interesting is that a lot of clients go through the exercise with us, at least initially, and they go, "Well, what does this have to do with finance?" And they're like, and some of them are just like, "This is strange," and we're like, well, we need to understand who you are. We want to go create financial plans for you, but the world is conditioned clients to, we see it in the commercials, right? What's your number? What's your number? What can you retire for? And we've been conditioned to look at these relationships as just something based on investments or based on numbers. And those numbers are really nothing in the absence of, what it means to your life and what it's enabling you to do. And it's just interesting as advisors how we try to implement that, but we see clients almost feel like they're thrown for a little bit of a loop, for a curveball. And I love to see the industry progress that a little bit more in that thought, because what you're saying is such an important concept and provides so much more meaning to people. And I think that this, talks about a big evolution. You touched on this a little bit earlier, is when we look at the evolution of behavioral finance in general, right? We have used this word, the academic model of a person was a rational agent, right? That was a rational person. Now today, if you want to talk about in the past, people we deal with in reality are irrational, which has always irked me when we use that word, because really they're not irrational. They are normal. They're human beings. They have emotions. That's what makes us interesting. I wouldn't want to hang out with a bunch of rational people, but from the textbook perspective. I mean, I just don't think that'd be such an interesting thing to be doing. But when we think about this shift, how do you feel this influences the strategies that we use to really guide, financial decisions, right, and really improve client outcomes? Is it just a language shift, or is there a real, fundamental change in the way of thinking by, changing the way we, refer to rational versus irrational agents, and how that's really, that's normal?
Well, of course, all you can do really is to have conversations with clients. You don't do surgery, but those conversations can get to issues of life. So, for example, if you ask people, "What do you think is important in life?" They're not likely to begin by saying money. They're likely to say what's really is important is family and friends and health and work and so on. But then you point out that for each of them, you need money. That is, you cannot have a family, support a family without money. You cannot acquire education without money. You cannot acquire health and go to a physician without money. And so it is important to bring to client what they already know, of course, that money underlies everything, and yet there is more to life than money. And that you as an advisor are here to be a well-being advisor. Of course, it includes financial advising, but it also includes more, because everything is really connected. It is really part of the same portfolio. And here you're going to touch on things that are really central to people. So, some of them are really touchy. That is, we talk about money as assuring that we are going to have a comfortable retirement. But people, when they think about money, they don't just think about, will I have a comfortable retirement? They also think about, how do I measure up relative to my friends, relative to my coworkers? People strive for social status, and I know that for my life because it is important. Status is important to me. But what I do and what everyone does is, we compare ourselves to a comparison group. So I don't compare myself to billionaires. I don't compare myself to venture capitalists. I don't compare myself to physicians. I compare myself to, say, fellow academics. And it is not just money, of course. That is in academia. We care about who reads your books, who reads your articles, who cites your articles, and so on. So status is not just money. It can be a position, it can be occupation, it can be family, it can be many of the things that go into that. And so you really have to kind of use your own life as a laboratory and ask yourself, do you care about status? And the true answer is going to be yes. And if so, then you can assume quite reasonably that other people are interested in status as well. And the same applies to all of our aspirations. And so, what happens is that when we measure well-being, there is what is known as that U curve, like the letter U, where life well-being, in fact, goes down from early adulthood to middle age and then begins to go up. And I think that what is really happening is that early on, your aspirations, my aspirations, are higher than where we are. That is, if I just got a position as a professor, as an assistant professor, I strive to become an associate professor and then a full professor and perhaps be a chaired professor. And that's hard, because the editors are not sitting there waiting for you to submit a paper that they accept. It is really hard work. But then as you go on with life, and as you can see, I'm not a young man, what happens is that it's not that you have achieved all the goals you had, but rather you say, maybe they're not that important. Maybe instead of shooting for this target that I had in mind, I'm going to just put a circle around the shot that I gave it. And today, if somebody forgets to cite my paper that is relevant to that paper that he's writing, I don't care. I used to care about it when I was young. I no longer care. And so that really is a lesson to convey to people, that there comes a point where you must say, I've arrived. Now I can focus on what really is important to me now. I can focus on my family. I can focus on health, my own and family, and I can focus on helping other people. My wife, for example, does a lot of volunteer work for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is an organization, NAMI in short, that helps people who either live with mental illness or in their family there's mental illness. And there are a variety of courses, family to family, and so on, that my wife participates in, leads, and she has helped so many people, and she finds so much meaning in doing that. And I really admire her, and I really am happy to know that my wife is helping so many people.
You talk about arriving at a certain place at a point in time. Are there methods or things that you found that could be effective for that?
I don't think that you want to do that. It is when you're a young man, and let's say that the paper that you just wrote was rejected. You don't say, that's fine, maybe I'll go and do some other work. I want you to be frustrated. I want you to be unhappy. I want you to go back to your desk and revise that paper or think about other ones and so on. And so the reason we are unhappy when we are young is because we are striving, because we are ambitious. And that is really good. But with ambition also comes frustration. There will be a time when you will be able to kind of rest on your laurels, when you're going to be able to say, you know what, I have done well. Even if I just rose to be an associate professor, even if I just chose to rise to be a lieutenant rather than a general, that is fine. I've still done something good for my students. I've still done something good for my country, and take a pleasure and satisfaction and meaning in what you are doing.
What do you feel like's been the most significant contribution to behavioral finance of the papers that you published or the work that you've done?
Well, I think that what is most important to me, and I think where I make the greatest contribution, is really in expanding the circle of finance. And so people ask, what do you think is on the frontier of behavioral finance? And I say, the image you have is wrong. It is not a matter of is AI on the frontier? Is neuroeconomics on the frontier? It is a matter of expanding the domain of finance. Now, some people will of course expand it by machine learning techniques and so on. My comparative advantage is by thinking about people and what they want and how it is that they behave. And so we started with standard finance, where people are rational. The first generation of behavioral finance, we describe them as irrational, and I don't like the word any more than you do. We describe them essentially as stupid. We still accepted that all they want is to maximize their wealth, but we said, no, they are not really doing it right. Look at it. They are not diversifying, they're trading too much, and so on. In the second generation, we get closer to real life and real people. And we say, people look for utilitarian benefits, wealth, but also expressive and emotional benefits. How do you explain? Some people care about being socially responsible, for example, or how people look at investments as a way to elevate their status. That is, I'm into hedge funds or I'm into private equity rather than plain mutual fund. And in the third generation, I really expanded further to talk about well-being, to say you have to look at that total. And in all of that, what really drives me is looking at myself and looking at the world and saying, here is something that supposedly is irrational, like dollar cost averaging. Well, but people are engaged in dollar cost averaging. So instead of calling it stupid, why don't you explain it? Why don't you make sense of it? And so I talk about issues that have to do with regret. You can see that if I have a bunch of money and I put it all in the stock market today and the market declines tomorrow, I'm going to feel terrible. I'm going to feel regret. So if I really spread it over a few months, then I'm going to have some cases where I put it in just before the market has gone down, and somewhere it is just about to go up, and I kind of minimize my regret. And so you can see that once you begin to think about people as being pretty intelligent, but they want things that are not so-called rational, you understand lots of things. I've just finished a paper that I wrote with two colleagues from Vanguard. The puzzle that we faced was, why is it that so many investors in equity income funds that supposedly they are buying so that they can get the income to live on, why is it that they reinvest those dividends pretty much as people in plain equity funds do. So that's what I look at. I look at puzzles and I say, what's going on? And so we did a survey and we found what really underlies people's thinking. Why is it that they choose those funds? And it is not necessarily to spend the dividends. It is things like they think that these companies are better managed or care more about investors or whatever it is. And so I can go through example after example of just looking at the world and saying something does not square with the theory. Instead of saying that the world is wrong, I say the theory is wrong. And why don't you develop a theory that conforms to real life rather than try to get real life to conform to your theory?
I love that concept. And we talk about this a lot on the investment side because I've been long a proponent that there's the way the textbook says people should invest, right? And then there's the reality of how people do invest and how us as investment managers need to rethink that because that gap that behavioral finance creates. And I think to elaborate on that, I think sometimes what happens, Professor Statman, is that we say, for example, there's a big argument if you buy and hold and you keep everything, you have X amount of dollars. But the reality is we ignore the fact that markets go way up, markets go way down. People have, regret bias. People get concerned. Everyone's a little bit unique. How do we better create investment strategies around how people behavioral respond to concepts like prospect theory, right? How we don't feel the pain, the joy of gain and the pain of loss in the same aspect. And I think some of that relates to, yes, if they follow the academic theory, there could be one result, but maybe we're not equipped to follow that. So we have to find the best result for that person that they can deal with.
Think about medicine. Suppose I'm overweight and suppose that I'm sedentary, and the physician says you have to exercise an hour a day, and you have to restrict your diet to no more than 2,000 calories. And I say, you must be kidding. It is really hard work. I'm just going to ignore it. But if the physician says, how about if you begin small? How about if you begin with 15 minutes? How about 30 minutes every 2 days, and then get into it? How about cutting out some alcohol from your diet and so on? Then in those small steps can lead to large steps. Same applies to advisors. If the advisor says, dollar cost averaging is stupid. If you have this inheritance of $100,000, just put it in the market because that's what you want eventually. Well, the client is going to be frozen, standing at the edge of the pool. But if you say, how about you do it in stages? How about if you step into the pool one leg at a time, and then get your torso in, and then get your arms in, and then you can begin to swim and so on. You're going to do it. Whereas if you say just go on this jump board and just jump in head on, this does not work. This is really what is involved. That is. We know that from our kids, you cannot drive your kids. You can guide your kids with patience. You have to do it with humor. You have to do it with an understanding of what it is that people want, and then you can really help people, and then you are really happy with yourself as well in being able to have helped people.
I think what you talk about there highlights a question we get all the time. We get people coming to us and saying, well, what should I save for retirement? Or what should I save for my kids' college education? And I'm like, well, you don't want to know what number you should be saving because it's irrelevant, right? We should be talking about what you feel comfortable with because it's more important that we create the habit and we start somewhere where you could take that baby step. So even for people who have significant amounts of wealth, there's, everyone always has this feeling that they're, especially in this day and age, being pulled in every direction with expenses, right? Things have become increasingly expensive. If it takes you $25, let's start with $25. Let's see how that works for a couple months. Let's put $35 into it and, pick whatever number you want. Let's start somewhere that we can achieve, and then let's slowly take it up and let's see, does this have an effect on your life? Is this changing anything? Take those, put your toe in the water, get your foot in the water and take your time. It's not about what we should be doing. It's about what can you do and you feel comfortable in what you can commit to. And that goes back to a comment I spoke about earlier a little bit is, the finance industry saying, what's your number? How do you get here? Always putting the end goal in mind ignores the journey or what it takes to get there. And I think ignores the commitment of our clients to get there, because it's a lot. It's not easy.
Absolutely. And I never had a number in my mind. I never had a goal. It is just that I knew that there is such a thing as a future, that I would not be able to work forever. And so what I did was to develop habits. And in fact, my parents helped me develop those habits early on when they opened a savings account for me, and they doubled any amount that I put in there, which even though I didn't buy toys with it, I kind of had, wow, I'm kind of getting rich, I'm getting double. And that's what I did for my daughters, that is, it is really a small but very useful way to get people to save. And the same applies for me later on. That is, I always saved some, depending on the circumstances. I was always mindful. I was not stingy, but I followed my mother's advice. My mother said, spend money, but don't waste it. And so I save money. I don't have a particular percentage. I save money. And boy, compounding actually works, I started teaching in 1975 when I was still a student at Columbia. I started teaching at the City University of New York, and they started a 403b account for me, and they put some money, and I added to that. And those few thousands are now hundreds of thousands of dollars. Did I think about it at that time? No, I just said responsible people think about the future. They develop habits of responsible saving, responsible spending. I did not really have a particular goal. When I was a kid, I wanted a bike. Well, every kid wants a bike, okay? So my parents didn't want to get me a bike because they're afraid that I'm going to break my bones. One day I come home and there is a new bike that is leaning next to the entrance door. So the way he thought about it is it's a gift. When you give a gift, you take off that price tag off it. The same thing here. But I learned to save not by having, well, if you want a bike, you have to take money from your allowance, blah, blah. I learned from what they did, and as I watched them, and they were reasonable in their saving and spending, and that is what I did, and that is what my kids are doing, and so that really works. You have to guide people. Some children indeed end up being spendthrifts. I think that you have to restrain that, but some people develop the kind of self-control that is necessary for prudent spending without becoming misers.
There's so many different ways we could take this, but you're very fortunate to have parents who instilled very important, financial literacy, right? It's financial literacy at its core. And there's a lot of research that indicates that those behaviors happen very early on in children. I've heard, sometimes it's formed as early as 7 years old. And, financial literacy for us is a really big initiative. And we are trying to work with communities as a whole to increase that, because not everyone's as fortunate to have parents that understand instilling those behaviors, right? Identifying needs versus wants, being able to make those responsible decisions. And we believe that, we have to help those parents understand, but also bring it to the children, because it has such an impact on, living a great life, right? And we've seen that. I'm just curious if you have any thought. I mean, you've spoken about yourself personally, but have you noticed trends, or have you noticed great practices that parents can use, or other advisors trying to influence parents and families that help enhance that financial literacy?
Teaching people about compounding, that a Starbucks latte that you are buying today at $5, if you just wait until you're 65, it's going to grow to $5,000. That is silly. That is, I say, think about the money that you spend on diapers to diaper your baby. If you did not spend it, you would have this much more when you're 65. Well, you cannot have your kids at 65. There is some. Now, people learn good habits from parents, and people learn bad habits. But people are smart, people are intelligent, and people can see that the wasteful spending of their parents drove them into bankruptcy. And they're going to say, I learned my lesson not by following them, but by going in the opposite direction. And if you read the book, you will see that there are stories of one kind and another. And people will talk about, for example, the reason my parents got divorced is because my mother was a saver, my father was a spender. It just did not work together. And so you can see that in your marriage, you say, we have to find ways to manage that. Some of them are, kind of, you could call them sad. There's a story I tell in the book about a man who described how his wife came to him and she said, I've accumulated some $10,000 of credit card debt, and I don't think that I can control my spending very well. And so what he did was to kind of put her on an allowance, that is kind of as you would do for a kid. Now, it is kind of embarrassing, to treat an adult like a kid, but you can see that sometimes you have to find some methods to make sure that marriage survives and financial security is achieved, and so on. And I like your notion of financial literacy. Financial literacy is not about compounding. It is not about knowing that interest rates go up, bond prices go down. Financial literacy is about those habits of saving, about knowing that there is a future, knowing some facts, like if you are going to put your money into a mutual fund that has high expense ratios, you are most likely going to lag those that put it, say, in a low-cost index fund. You can say, here's the evidence about people who trade much. It kind of feels like you know where the market is going to go, but you don't know. And you will be wasting your money, and you're not going to achieve any goal in the future. And so you have to, at the same time, you have to understand that for young people, they want things that are understandable. They want to be able to have a wedding, and it costs some money. They want to take a trip from time to time. They want to be able to take a date out, and if you're a man, pay for both of you. All of those things are there. It is just kind of coming back to my mom's advice: spend money, but don't waste it.
And what's interesting also, Professor Statman, In your book, you talk about the FIRE movement, and you talk about some individuals within there that actually, uh, were so eager to retire early, and they were so stringent on their spending and saving that actually when they retired, even though they had millions in the bank, they couldn't undo those behaviors that they had created to enjoy the life they had envisioned enjoying. So I think there's the opposite side of it as well. And I've seen this in practice actually as well. You have these individuals who are 35, 40 years old, have millions because they've participated in, not everyone's, let's call it FIRE, but they participate on trying to retire as early as they can and exit the workforce, but they can't change the behaviors. They can't unlearn or uncondition what got them to where they are. And there's an essence of that balance between financial well-being and, life well-being.
When I talk with people like you, advisors, they actually tell me that when they speak to clients who are older, say in their 70s and older, the problem that they have is to get those people to spend more, not to save more. And when I talk about it to financial advisors, they say, "You are describing my parents," and so yeah, my mother-in-law, when she was old, she had the rickety sofa, but she said it's fine, I don't, I can live with it. Eventually, my wife and her two brothers bought a new sofa and tossed out the old one, and she smiled and she says, "You are dipping into your inheritance. If you work bazillion hours when you're in your 20s and 30s, and then you retire when you are in your 40s and you say it's going to be wonderful, then suddenly you find not only that you find it hard to give up those habits of being miserly, but what are you going to do in retirement? You suddenly realize that work can be frustrating, but there are ways to find work that is less frustrating, that is enjoyable. All work has some frustrating parts in it, but even being a professor, I have to grade papers. I don't care much for that, but then I have many enjoyable parts, and I take the bad with the good, and the same applies here. And so when people look back at their life and they said, "Did I really do the right thing by refraining from ever having a Starbucks coffee and always making it cheaply at home?" When I turned down an invitation to join friends to dinner because I was reluctant to pay the price, I've lost friendship because I was too miserly. Advisors who manage to, with humor, with stories of the kind that you'll find in the book, to guide people and say, find balance. Don't be one who is a spendthrift, but don't be a miser either.
We could talk about so much of this all day long. I got to touch on one topic. I think you addressed it a little bit. The rise of robo-advisors and now artificial intelligence. How do you see the role of the human financial advisor evolving? And how does robo-advisor, AI help, this evolution or, hinder this evolution?
When people are in their 20s and 30s, those issues of life well-being matter less. They're likely not to have those knocks in life, a child who is ill and so on. They are in the business of developing their career, saving for it, investing wisely. Robo-advisors do that. But as you get older, those problems begin to pop up. There are problems in family, there are problems of divorce, there are problems of sudden illness, and so on. This really is where you need a well-being advisor. And so, to my mind, robo-advisors will never be life well-being advisors. For that, you need people like me and you, people who can empathize, people who can share their own stories and turn from clients into friends. So I think that the more automated investing we are going to have, the more robo-advisor, the more we are going to see the value of well-being advisors. But it is really important for flesh and blood advisors not to compete with robo-advisors. That is, robo-advisors do pretty good pie chart portfolios. You can do them perhaps a bit better, but that's not enough to differentiate yourself and not enough to charge so much more than a robo-advisor. Robo-advisors help you realize losses. Well, that's very nice. You can do that also. So you really have to move on to ask yourself, what is it that robo-advisors don't do that I can do? Where's my comparative advantage? And that is in that well-being focus that you have to adopt. Because if you just think about it as just the finance, I say kind of like a physician. If you don't like dealing with people, be a pathologist. Work in the lab, do some examination of tissues and so on. But if you want to work with real people, if you want clients, patients to refer other people to you, you better be a good physician. You better develop this well-being approach, and the same applies to financial advisors. To me, financial advisors are very much like me in the sense that we are teachers, but they're more than that. I think about them as priests and rabbis and ministers. They are people who clients put their financial lives in their hands. And so it is a really profound responsibility. And when advisors do it right, when they're really fiduciaries, not just in name, but they really put their clients' life ahead of their own, it feels so good. When I teach a class and I can see in my students' eyes that they got the point that I was trying to convey, it makes me so happy, in addition to them being happy that they got the material that professor is trying to teach.
It's funny you mentioned about being being friends with your clients or having a friend. In February of 2020, I remember there's this client who came into our office and we sat down together and I go, you and I are going to be best friends. Long and behold, we spent a lot of pandemic days together, becoming really great friends. So it's kind of interesting and funny that you say that. It brings back a lot of memories and history, not just with that one situation, but with so many of them. There's so much that we've covered here, Professor Statman, today, and we could probably go on for so much longer. I just want to check it. Is there something that we didn't cover? Is there something that you think is really important to make sure that we touch on, as a takeaway here?
I think that, as you said, if we had many hours, we can surely use them productively, as you can with your clients. But at some point, some clients are going to be kind of like full-fledged friends, but in others, it is as you go to a physician and the physician explains what is going on, offers you options, even if the situation is dire. You leave the office with pain, but with a sense that somebody listened to you, somebody guided you, and so on. So even if you don't become personal friends, even if you don't go to dinner together, you know that person cares about you more than a source of money or more than just a bunch of medicines and illnesses. That person cares about you. And that really is a good feeling. You know, I can tell you stories about myself and interaction with physicians. I'm sure that you can tell me similar stories. Everyone can. And the reason people leave physicians is not because those physicians don't know medicine. It is because they treated them as if that person is just the illness rather than a full-fledged person. And the same applies to financial advisors. You really have to cross that boundary between finances and life. Know that finances underlie life and life well-being, but life well-being is so much more than finances.
Professor Statman, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for spending this time, and we could go on, and maybe one day we circle back to some of these other topics and elaborate them, or maybe if there's another book that you have in the pipeline there that comes out, we can continue to talk about this. But I think it's so many important things and so many important messages that you talk about, and I think so much of it is inspiring. And I know when I read books like what you put out there, helps me reevaluate and rethink the approach to my own life, and not just how we help our own clients. And I think that is just really a statement to you. So I say at the end of the day, remember, true wealth is really about living a full life of purpose, happiness, and well-being, and it goes beyond the dollars and cents. So thank you so much, Professor Statman, for joining us today. It really was a pleasure.
Thank you, Todd. It was wonderful to speak with you and with all the people who are going to be listening.